Hello, everybody. Most of us have heard about mentoring, and some of us have actually had mentors to help us in our careers and our lives. You're about to meet Lisa Fain, who wrote a book about mentoring across differences. She has an interesting take on why it's important to know how to mentor across all kinds of differences. Lisa is an attorney by trade and currently head of the Center for Mentoring Excellence. She and her mother co-authored Bridging Differences for Better Mentoring. Here is Lisa. Hello, Lisa.
Hi,
I am,
Jean.
I am so excited to have you here. When I saw someone actually talked about mentoring across differences, I said, wow, I got to know about this person and what they have to say. I've been involved in one project with that, but we were just winging it. So here I have an expert who knows about it. So, everybody, let me just say this is Lisa Fain. She co authored Bridging Difference for Better Mentoring with her mother, Lois Zachary. And I have to say one thing, we have a mother daughter duo affiliated with Leading Consciously. So I got all excited when I saw, oh, here's another one that can work.
I can't wait to hear about it.
Yes. So thank you for coming.
Delighted to be here, Jean. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start off with just some basic definitions so we're on the same page. First, the two definitions I'm going to ask you are first, what's mentoring?
Okay.
And how do you distinguish between mentoring and coaching and therapy, which is what people always ask?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why don't we start there?
Excellent. So mentoring is a developmental relationship that is reciprocal, and it is about the development, the improvement, or the interest of the mentee's skills, knowledge, or development. And I like to say that the best way to kind of think about it as its only own unique entity is that there's three characteristics that define a mentoring relationship. There's learning, there is reciprocity, and there's co-creation. So learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring.
Wait a minute, say that real slow. Yeah, that's a lot of
Yeah,
concepts. Say it
yeah.
again.
So learning, which is the first of the three traits that distinguish mentoring, is really important. It's important to remember that learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring. Without a learning relationship, it is lunch, it is advising, it is dropping by one's office, it is just a conversation. But if it doesn't have learning, it's not mentoring. So that's factor number
Oh,
one.
hang on. The purpose is learning.
Mm-hmm.
The process of mentoring involves learning.
Yep.
And did you say product was the
And the
third?
product is learning. Yeah.
And okay, I get it. I
Yeah, the
get it.
purpose, the product, and the process is learning. So that's factor number one that distinguishes it. Factor number two is reciprocity, right? So we know that mentors give and mentors get, and mentees give and mentees get. Too often when people are thinking about mentoring, they only think about what the mentee gets. But the
Yeah,
truth is,
one way.
yeah, but it's not, right?
Right.
Mentoring, I'm sure you know this from your own mentoring relationships, Jean, is that mentors grow and mentors gain as sometimes as much or more than mentees gain. So there's the reciprocity. And then the third factor is co-creation. And I like to say that in this, when you're talking about co-creation, it's called the funny math of mentoring, right? That 1 + 1 = 3. Because in a one-on-one mentoring relationship, and there are other forms of mentoring that we can talk about if you like, but just for the purpose of illustration of what the definition of mentoring, we'll talk about a one-on-one mentoring relationship. 1 + 1 = 3. There's the mentor, there's the mentee, and then there's the relationship that the mentor and the mentee co-create together. And we can talk about this when we talk about kind of the model of mentoring, what that co-creation is like. But that's why when people say things like, Oprah is my mentor, I sort of roll my eyes a little bit because does
Ah,
Oprah know you? Is there the reciprocity? Have you co-created the relationship? In most cases, the answer is no, right? Oprah's an amazing role model. She's wise and she's sage and all of those things. but she's not your mentor unless there's been this reciprocal learning where you've co-created the mentoring relationship. So
Okay.
that I think answers the first part of your question.
So
Yeah.
let's stop with that.
Yeah.
A lot of people think of mentoring as a one way. This is what you're implying. Something that the mentor does for the mentee. How can the mentor learn from this inferior, unsophisticated, naive mentee?
Oh, I love that question, and I love the way you phrased it. Okay, well, let's start with the fact that a mentee, we're talking here about adult learning. Now, the same model in general happens with youth as well, and I would argue that what I'm about to say also applies to youth, but let's talk about it just in terms of adult mentoring. So, inferior, naive, all of those words. We know that I know you were saying it tongue in cheek, so I'm
Yes.
saying it back there
Thank
tongue
you.
in cheek with you. Yes. But the mentee comes as a whole person, right? So that's the first thing that's always important for mentors to learn, to know when they come into a mentoring relationship is your mentee is coming with the fullness and the richness of their own lives and experience, right? So that's the first piece. And the second piece is for those of your listeners who are data driven. What we know about the data and the research for mentoring is that mentors become better leaders. They have more career satisfaction. They gain more cross-cultural competency, more intergenerational perspectives. They have a sounding board and a reality check for their own experiences, and more and more and more. There's countless other benefits that mentors gain as well. So it is in the intentionality and the reflection that's required of quality mentoring relationships that mentors are really able to gain as well. The other thing that I want to just state that I think also responds to your tongue-in-cheek question is the fact that when mentees know that their mentors are gaining from the relationship as well, it so enhances the quality of the relationship because very often I'll hear from new mentees, I don't want to burden my mentor. I don't want to take of
That's
their
right.
time,
Yeah.
all of the things. But when they know that if they are actually having the intentionality and the reflection that's required around mentoring, that their mentors are gaining as much as they do, they view mentoring both as a gift to themselves and as a gift to their mentoring partner. And that changes everything.
Okay, so the mentoring program I told you that I was co-facilitator of, we required the mentor and the mentee to have a discussion so they could identify exactly what the mentor was going to learn from the mentee.
Mm,
So that was part of their initial contracting. So, for an example, one wanted to learn about Black culture, white male, knew nothing about Black culture. So that was part of the contracting. And another, he knew the mentee was sophisticated in computers and the mentor wasn't.
mhm.
So I was giving that as an example. Do you see overt contracting like that as beneficial? Because it seems like you're talking about over and beyond concrete things.
Yeah, I think it's really is important to have that discussion at the beginning of the mentoring relationship about what is the outcome that you want,
Okay.
and to keep that front and center, and also to have the flexibility and the fluidity to know that that may evolve and change throughout the course of the mentoring relationship. So I think it's really a both and, Jean. I do think that intentionality and that desired outcome conversation is super important at the beginning. And hold on to it instead of holding on to it tightly. For those who are listening, I'm making a fist, right? Hold on to it loosely, right? And know that you, as the mentor or the mentee, your learning needs may change, your awareness may change, it may evolve, and as the course of the relationship, there may be something else, something additional, or something different that you want to take
Okay.
out of the
Yeah.
relationship. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So mentoring versus therapy versus coaching.
Coaching. Okay. Excellent. So let's do mentoring and coaching first, and then we'll add therapy in the mix here. So, my mom used to say that mentoring is the most promiscuously used word in leadership development because people really do confuse it with coaching and sponsoring and therapy.
Promiscuous.
Yeah, yeah, right. So the truth is they're sisters. Mentoring and coaching are sisters in that they both are developmental focused relationships. They both are driven by the learning needs of either the coachee or the mentee. And remember my three characteristics. What's missing? So learning is what's in common with mentoring and coaching. What is not in common is this idea of reciprocity. Typically in a coaching relationship, it's not that, I mean, look, I do some coaching and you might too, Jean. It's not that as a coach, we don't learn and gain from a coaching relationship, but that's not the explicit purpose of a coaching relationship. The coaching relationship is really focused on the development of the client or the coachee, right?
Right.
Unlike a mentoring relationship. A coaching relationship is also usually focused on a specific discrete issue, and the coach brings the tools. What's beautiful and unique about a mentoring relationship is I have seen successful mentoring relationships where the mentor has no familiarity at all with what the mentee's own expertise is or job function is. They bring what I like to say is that mentors don't have to come with all the answers. They come with all the right questions, right? So there's not this sense of co-creation in the same way. There is a brand of co-create, like a co-creative coaching, but it's not the same as the co-creation in a mentoring relationship where you're establishing the rules and the agreements of the scope of the mentoring relationship. So you have the learning in common, but you don't have the reciprocity and the co-creation in mentoring and coaching. Now, you asked about therapy as well. So I'm a big proponent of therapy. I think therapy is incredible for people and can be absolutely transformative. And in that sense, it has a lot in common with mentoring. It can be absolutely transformative. However, again, you don't have the reciprocity in a healthy therapy relationship, I should say.
Right.
You
Yes.
don't have the reciprocity, right? The therapist is there for the exploration of the client. And therapists are usually concerned with this is a broad generalization, and I'm not a therapist, so the therapists among us can weigh in as well. But therapists are usually concerned with the why and the undergirding reasons that one behaves or believes something that one has, right? And works with the client to do that. So a mentor is usually not concerned with the undergirding beliefs and the whys that a mentee believes what they believe. They're really concerned with future development. I view therapy, and this isn't a non-expert view on what therapy is, as something that is so important and so critical and is focused on resolving the beliefs from the past so that you can move forward. Mentoring is a developmental relationship that's concerned with here and the future versus the past and here. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I define it too. Okay, difference. Now let me qualify so because I want you to be real concrete on difference. If you got a white female mentor and a white female mentee, and they're both in the same age group, but the mentee is neurodivergent and the mentor is not. Would you classify that as a difference? So what I'm asking you, because I want, when you to say difference, I want you to be real concrete as what constitutes a good difference
Yes.
versus similarity.
Yes. So I think neurodiversity is a form of diversity. It is a form of difference. I want to just lay one important principle in before us in this conversation as I continue to answer that question, which is that nobody owns difference. Everybody owns difference. So in other words, I'll just use you and I as a visible example, Jean. I'm a white woman. You're a woman of color, right? And does that mean that you're different from me or that I'm different from you? No, it means that we are different from one another. The differences lie between us. So you are not responsible for that difference. And I am not
I
responsible for that
love that.
difference, right? We're
Yeah.
both responsible for that difference. Okay, with that foundation, let me get back to your question because I think it's really important. If you asked me if there's a white female who is neurodivergent, right, and there's a white female who is more typically developing from a perspective of neuro functioning, is that
Neurotypical.
diversity more neuro? Thank you. Neurotypical is the word I was looking for. is that difference. Absolutely. And I would argue that there's probably even more differences between those two women, right? It's not just our race and our gender and our ability, disability, divergence, neurofunctioning, right? It's also our life experience. It's also our socioeconomic class. It's also our motivations and our values and our beliefs. And did I say life experiences? If not, say that again, right? It's also our family of origin and our political beliefs and our religious beliefs and all of the things that make up who we are that are also differences that need to be bridged. Because the problem is if you're making an assumption about me because I am a white neurotypical female, you don't know all the rest of that stuff, right? And you might find another white female neurotypical female who has a totally different life experience, and we have differences yet to bridge between the two of us as well.
Right. And I'm looking for this great quote that you have in your book. Here we go. So I just taking what you said, I want you to elaborate on this.
Mm-hmm.
You said, an effective mentoring relationship requires that each partner understand something about the other's generational context and yet not make generalizations.
Yeah. I forgot to say generation, so I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, let's talk about that, right? So it's interesting because there's a lot of talk now about, especially about Gen Z entering the workforce, right? And now you have four, and maybe even in some contexts, you have five generations working together in the workforce. Very often, it's interesting because, I think when we wrote this book, Gen Z, which is only, by the way, 4 years old, we wrote it 5 or 6 years ago. Even then, there were fewer Gen Z obviously working in the workplace. And so when people were talking about the younger generation, they were talking much more about Gen Y or millennials. And I can remember many conversations where people would make it was almost the last frontier of where people would make overtly disparaging comments based on an element of identity in an acceptable way in the workplace. 5 years ago, when we were writing this book, there were far fewer Gen Z in the workplace. And so at that time, when we were talking about the younger generation of the workforce, we were mostly talking about Gen Y or millennials. We use those terms interchangeably. And it was very interesting, Jean, because, whereas I'm not suggesting that there's not bias along these lines, but I am suggesting that in the workplace, people are hesitant, as they should be, to make broad generalizations or comments based on any element of identity, except in generational context. You hear that a lot more overtly, right? And the assumptions that we make based on people's age about them is both harmful, I think, and also erroneous. In the sense, we have to remember that even by generation, we have different experiences, and certainly this intersectionality of identity impacts that even more as well. Well, it's important to know that if you were born, say, in 1990, right, you lived through, you are identify as a part of the millennial generation, and you lived through uh, uh, the Twin Towers. You lived through 9/11, and you've lived through technology, and it experiences your identity. Making assumptions about how that impacts you can be really dangerous as well.
Okay. So I'm going to go next with putting the mentoring together now that we understand that with the difference. But
Mhm.
before we do that, let's find out more about you.
Okay.
Why do you care about this topic?
Yeah. You know, I I think about it all the time, Gina, and I get asked that question a lot. And I wish I could have a clear moment. It's not like there was one moment in time where I could say this is the reason, but I think it is a combination of things. So first of all, um, I grew up in Syracuse, New York, which is a small city. And I went to a parochial elementary school. And I remember the first time I felt different. um, Again, now then having a different definition of difference and who owns difference than I do, but as a child, right, we project difference on ourselves. The first time I felt different was when I went to a public middle school after being in a parochial elementary school. And I felt like, wow, I have not only a different experience, but I have a different religious belief than many of the people who I'm interacting with. And I remember feeling like a little bit of an outsider. It wasn't really until high school, when I was an exchange student, that I started to think about the impact of culture more deeply on difference. And then in college, I developed, I had a volunteer job to do at Literacy Chicago.
Let's go back to exchange student. Where did you go?
Yeah, great question. So I went to Australia, and you might be saying to yourself, difference, Australia? Yeah.
No,
Here's the
it's different.
It is different. It is very different. And this was in the late 80s. And I would imagine that what I'm about to say probably is less true now as we record this in 2024. But in the late 80s, there was a pronounced difference in this continuum of collectivism and individualism, which is
Yes.
a cultural continuum that I know you know about, right? And growing up in the States, I was from a very individualistic culture. Growing up in, excuse me, going to Australia, which was at the time a very collectivistic culture, right? And I remember this, it in the States, it's like, you raise your hand, the teacher calls on you, I got it. It's my job to get the A for myself, right? But not so in Australia. Hold back your questions, hold back your ambition until we all rise together, right? Now,
That
I
was
want
in the white population in Australia?
that was in the white population in Australia.
Wow, I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was very interesting because I wouldn't have been able to identify it. If you would have asked me at 16 years old, collectivism versus individualism, I would have looked at you, what are you talking about? But now, having studied that in the years since, I recognize that that's where the first difference was. Um, the other piece is I went to the public school system in Australia. Again, I don't know if this is still true, but this was true then, was Anglican, which is part of Christianity. And as part of the school, you went to chapel. Now, I'm Jewish, and the parochial school that I went to was a Jewish school. And as part of what was the expectation of students, we went to chapel. And in chapel, the students kneeled. Now, I was very comfortable with going to chapel because same deity, right? But I was not comfortable with kneeling. That's something was not part of my culture. And I remember going to the headmistress and saying at the time, I will very respectfully sit in chapel and pray, but I'm not comfortable kneeling, and having to explain to her that I was Jewish and being looked at like, you know, really prove it, kind of thing. So it wasn't hatefulness, Jane. It wasn't uh, anti-Semitic or anything like that. It was pure inexperience and lack of exposure on her part to understanding that somebody might not, that this was a cultural difference that made a difference. So I think that those planted the seed for me understanding difference. Clearly, as a white woman in America, there's a lot of privilege, and I could go my whole life without caring about difference or out without. But what happened was, when I went to college, I took a volunteer job at Literacy Chicago, which was teaching English as a second language and also some basic literacy skills to people who couldn't read, who tended to be lower SES people, many immigrants to the country. And I really developed an affinity for new Americans. It's part of my own cultural heritage as well. My family were immigrants several generations back, but also just recognizing how difficult it was in a big American city to come in as somebody who didn't either couldn't read, number one. Although there were Americans who were there who American born people who couldn't read as well, but most of the population were people who were who were immigrants to the country, non-native English speakers who had difficulty reading, and really getting a sense of what's it like to come into this country and try to get by and have ambition and drive and desire and have so many obstacles. And that really planted the seed for thinking and caring about difference. Couple that with my degree in social policy, where I was beginning to read about what it was like, just learn about inequities in this world. And it really started to plant the seeds. And then several years later, and I know this is a long story, so I'll try to keep it shorter, but several years later, when I was in the workforce, um, as an attorney, I did pro bono immigration work, and then I went into in-house to do labor and employment work at a startup company. And for lots of different reasons, they really needed a diversity initiative, and I was their attorney, not thinking that I was going to lead the diversity initiative, but I went in and I said, I think we need to start thinking about having just greater representation in this workforce to both to create opportunity, but also to represent who our consumers are. And they said, well, can you kind of figure that out for us? And I thought to myself, for those who are listening, do you see the eye? Gene sees the eye roll. You might not, but that's what I thought to myself was eye roll, right? How am I going to do this and still do my job as your in-house employment attorney? But, if you want to motivate me, Gene, just ask me to figure something out. That's my
Oh,
juice, and especially an area that I was interested in. So I started to look into what does it mean to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative in an organization, and what does that look like,
and you
right?
knew that was what they were asking you for.
Yeah, I don't know that they knew that's what they were asking me for, but I knew that that's what they were asking me for. It was 2009, maybe 2010. Um, I mean, there were plenty of DEI professionals in the workforce, but not in companies necessarily of this size and that kind of thing. And I knew enough to know that I didn't know enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I started to do research and I hired some DEI consultants to kind of help us with our initiative. And I had this epiphany one day. It was actually, I remember it very well, Jean, because it was Thanksgiving. I was in New York with my family, and I called. We were getting ready to hire a DEI person for the full-time role. And I was like, I actually want to try this role. I'm passionate about it. I know this organization. And they gave me a chance as the DEI leader. And I would say my passion for this work only grew the more I learned what was required and the more I um, got to know people and establish relationships across difference. And that's where my passion for this relationship oriented bridge building really was born.
Because explain that, connect the dots. You were
Yeah.
a leader.
I was a leader, and I would began to see in the workplace. I would say there's beautiful things about working in the DEI field, and there's some frustrating things about working in the DEI field, right? The most frustrating thing is that everything feels like a drop in the bucket
Hey,
sometimes.
say that again.
Yeah, right. Everything feels like a drop in the bucket. You have great conversations, or you hold great round tables, or you have amazing events, and people are excited and yeah, we want to do it. And then they go back to their silos and crickets. And one person cannot own bridging differences in an organization. It really has to be something that is owned by everybody. And so I started to get frustrated about it. But when I would start to see difference, when I would start to see movement, is when I would start to see people in the workplace have meaningful relationships across difference. So if I have a colleague or somebody who works for me or a supervisor who is different from me in some substantial way, and I'm needing to get to know them, not them because they are Black female, not them because they are neurodivergent, but I need to know you. And if you start to build these relationships across difference and get curious and have the sense of knowing, I would start to see people's inclusive behaviors just like soar, like their cultural competency would get so much better because they're working on it with accountability towards another human being, right? And really getting to know that. And so I started to think, there's something here. There's something here about creating relationships across difference that really starts to move the needle in the workplace. Well, all around this time, I had started
Just to
to,
wait, hang on. I just got to get this.
yeah.
What you're saying is you discovered that growth and learning comes not with interacting with sameness, but interacting with difference.
I love the way you said it way better than I said it. Yes, that's exactly right. That's
That's
exactly.
just phenomenal to me that you observed that.
Well, here I am focused on, as somebody who grew up with privilege, right? Who I need to learn. Like I had my own learning to do. By the way, still have my own learning to do. Let's be clear, I'm not done. But
I'm not done either.
yeah. I had my own learning to do. And I'm starting to be a student at this time of like, what is going to move the needle? I gotta figure out how we're going to move the needle in the workplace. So I gotta see what's making a difference. But when people feel like it is just something to study, I'm curious about it. It's just something to study. Add it to my list of things to do, right? I mean, I got a million other things to do. But when they have that accountability for relationship with somebody else, now I really need to figure it out because for some people it's self-protection, right? I got to figure out this because I don't want to step in it and, you know, cause offense or whatever. Maybe it's even more self-motivated than that, right? I don't want to, have liability. I don't want to get in trouble, whatever. But in many cases, let's assume the best of people thinking about other people. I don't want to step in and offend, but I want to connect, right? And relationships involve getting to know one another. It involves real curiosity. It involves seeing you as a human being. So all of a sudden, you start to seeing you as a human being with whom I want to have a relationship. That starts to create some accountability for change, and that gets super exciting, right?
Okay, yeah, but I have not heard anybody approach diversity and mentoring and the way you're doing it. Come at it from, it's like almost like I feel like you took me to the back alley and they're bringing me around the thing to the front door. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
so what you're saying is if people say the way to handle cross-cultural differences is through dialogue. You hear that all the time, dialogue, dialogue.
I agree.
What you're saying is if I care about you, I'm now motivated to learn about you and to conquer whatever cultural differences are in our way. But I have to get motivated because I care.
Yeah, yeah. Look, there are plenty of people who may be motivated anyway, right? And I think and that's cool. That's wonderful to see, right? It's wonderful to see if you have the motivation without the personal accountability, right? But the personal accountability is what creates the change because it makes what's otherwise important urgent all of a sudden.
Okay, so tell me, I used motivation. You're talking accountability. Tell me what accountability as a concept adds to the motivation.
Yeah. Urgency, the desire to save face, the desire to feel influential. It creates this sense of responsibility.
Okay, so put it in a sentence. Who is accountable to whom in that scenario?
We are accountable to one another as if you and I are in a relationship, right? And I mean a work relationship. I mean, if we are accountable to each other to um, to get to know one another. We are accountable to each other to make this relationship work. And the only real way to do it is for me to see you, and you to see me, right? But the seeing actually happens through dialogue. It's not a surface seeing, it's seeing the
Right,
whole of somebody.
right. Okay, so you're saying this is just fascinating. So you're saying that the way to conquer the heartbreaks of difference is through having the desire to see one another and to feel accountable for making that relationship work.
I love exactly. And I love the word that you used just a few moments ago, Jean, which was dialogue, right? Dialogue is so, so, so important. And it doesn't mean dialogue and conversation are two different things.
Right.
Right? Dialogue is a deeper conversation where we really are, it's generative. There's learning in dialogue. There's sharing in dialogue. There's trust and psychological safety in dialogue, right? And so when we create this dialogue, that's when we create that learning. That's when we create that accountability for one another. That's when we create that seeing of each other.
Okay, so let's regroup here. Recap
Yeah.
is a better word. So
Hmm.
you went from as a Jewish child going to parochial schools, you went to public school where you counted the first difference. You went to Australia where you encountered another difference, and this time it was a religious difference, and they had a practice that you couldn't subscribe to. But
Mhm.
what I got left hanging on that is when you said to the teacher, I can't do that, did you suffer penalty from that?
Did not suffer penalty from that. There was no penalty. I mean, this is why I say it didn't come from hatefulness. It came from lack of exposure,
Okay.
right? And that's a really important thing that I think, and you've just gotten me to articulate that for the very first time, maybe even in my life, Jane, that it's about this is Jean, this is about exposure to difference, right? And I don't know that this woman had ever met a Jewish person before, ever in her
So
life.
what you got was you got difference without hate
What a beautiful
at
thing!
a young age.
How lucky and fortunate am I that that was my exposure, right? I mean, that is not the case for so many people. So we have Australian society, which is advanced in terms of socioeconomics, and American society, white leadership, white history, colonial history. We tend to think, oh, maybe it's the same. But the truth is, there is a lot of difference, cultural difference. And for the first time, not only was I exposed to religious difference, because the truth is, in that experience, because it was difference without hate, I felt very included and very warm and welcome in that society. But I also, for the first time in my life, noticed cultural differences, right?
Yes, yes.
And that was really significant, I think, in my own development and my own passion around these issues.
Okay, so that piqued your curiosity. Then you ended up as a lawyer and ended up being asked to head this DEIB initiative. And then you got attracted to the idea of how do we bridge these differences? How do we make this work? Oh, I forgot, I left out in the middle, then you're teaching people who are not from this country and not from the advantages of this country, and you're aware of inequities.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got thrown into the DEI stuff, and
Yep.
you by this time you're saying what makes all of this work?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the common ingredient?
Yeah. So I got to tell you what happened next because it'll help it all bridge together.
Okay.
So we had a women's group, and our women's group wanted a mentoring program. And
Is this at your job? Where's
this
this?
was at my job when I was leading DEI. We had,
Okay.
we called them BRGs, but employee resource groups, business resource groups, employee resource networks, they're all, those terms are synonymous, relatively so. And our women's ERG had wanted a mentoring program. And it just so happened that my mother had founded Center for Mentoring Excellence in 1992. So I called her up and I said, Mom, what do we do? Our women's group wants a mentoring program. She said, why don't you bring me in and have me, kick it off and train the mentors and the mentees? And I said to her, Mom, I manage a budget and this is a, corporation. I cannot say to my boss, let's hire my mother. And yet we were able to work it out. So she was able to come, and she's at the front of the room talking to the mentors and the mentees about the importance of these developmental relationships and how transformative they can be. And I'm sitting in the room taking notes, having an epiphany, because my frustration, as I had mentioned to you, was that things didn't feel that movement really only happened in these in terms of inclusion, in terms of these relationships. And she's talking about the importance of these developmental relationships. And I had this moment of connecting the dots, of saying, this passion for mentoring, and the power of mentoring, because mentoring ultimately is about learning in a relationship context, can have such an impact in terms of creating inclusive environments. Like, it just was, to me, this dot connecting. And we started to think about, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something there about how using mentoring as a tool to create more inclusive work environments. And that's where it
Well,
all,
if we learn together, we include one another.
if we learn together, we grow together, we include one another, and we start to see our differences as assets instead of as divides.
Because we're focused on learning
Because we're focused on learning. Exactly.
as opposed to judgments and you shouldn't be that way and all of that stuff. We're
Yeah,
focused on learning.
Exactly. We're focused on learning and we all own that responsibility.
That's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
You've gotten me more fascinated about mentoring.
I love it. I love to hear it.
Okay, I'm real serious about that. I had not really thought about the power of mentoring per se,
Yeah.
in the way that you're now describing. And I certainly hadn't thought of it as a technology to help conquer this difference quagmire that we're in.
Yeah.
When we understand and appreciate the differences between us, we can leverage them to improve our conversations, deepen our learning, and spur creative thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so we make the mistake too often that people approach of assuming that people approach problems, approach situations with the same perspective that we have, right?
Yes.
And I think I'm sure you'll agree, Jean, that like one of the beautiful things about diversity is the ability to spur innovation, is the ability to see things differently. So when we understand that my truth may not be your truth, what might be normal, I'm using air quotes for those who are listening, right? For me, may be not normal for you. And there's no better or worse. There is a difference. So it is so expansive and expanding to be in these relationships across difference because you start to understand that you're it's like perspective seeking, right? You're seeking other perspectives and you're able to take other perspectives.
Yeah, I'm smiling because you're saying when I first started out umpteen years ago on this diversity trek, I remember standing in front of a group of people, mostly white men, hospital administrators, and they were saying, "What's the advantage of diversity?" I say, "Otherwise, you become stupid." And and if you can't get diversity, you're committing to being stupid. And I didn't know I was so serious about that. And I didn't know how to put it in positive terms. You
Yeah.
just put it in positive terms. If you're open to other perspectives, you learn. That's obvious. But all I could think was if you don't open yourself, if you stay in your little small world, you're committing to being stupid.
Well, the way you say it is much more direct than the way I said it, and I kind of like that. But it's true. It's like you don't know what you don't know. There's that, what do they say? There's this, this universe of the information, right? There's the stuff you know,
Right,
right? There's the stuff you don't know.
right.
And then there's this whole big old wedge of the stuff that you don't know. And shouldn't it be, as learners, right? Shouldn't it be our goal to decrease that pie of the stuff that we don't know? And I feel like having relationships across difference is the way to do that.
Oh, I love this. Okay. I'm gonna give you another quote that's a variation of what you just said, so you can elaborate. When we fail to differentiate between self and other in a mentoring relationship, we run the risk of projecting our own lived experience onto our mentee.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing is, people often think of mentoring as the mentor's job is to be the sage on the stage, right? Like, this is how it was in my day, and this is how you should do it. And let me tell you about my journey and tell you my war stories. And then you put those in your bag of tricks and you go out the door and you've gained something, right? But that's not what mentoring is, right?
Oh, that gave me the goosebumps. Go ahead.
Yeah. Mentoring is a good mentor is a guide on the side. A good mentor is a facilitator of learning, is somebody who realizes, as we said before, that the mentee is whole and rich with their own perspectives and their own lives. And the mentor's job is to, you can share your wisdom. Of course, share your wisdom, but then test it and don't assume that your path and your lessons are resonant with your mentee. Test that, right? So you might tell me your story, Jean, and I might come in and ask you advice of, how do you create a podcast? And you might say, this is how I did it, blah, 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 blah. And that's helpful to know. But as a skilled mentor, you might say, how does that resonate with you? Will that work for you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. What
Help
parts
me.
of it don't fit you?
Exactly, exactly. And then we have a conversation about that. And again, as the mentor, your job is to see me as a mentee with my own needs and perspectives that may be different from yours. And your right path is not my right path.
And as the mentor, you learn about another aspect of life and how your theory does not apply.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I
It's
love
funny.
this.
We were just having a conversation this morning, my team and I. The term protege is often used instead of mentee. There's, a lot of debate about, do you call them mentees or do you call them proteges? And even though mentee I know is not, it's mentee is a made up word, right? But I like that word better than protege, and I'll tell you why. A lot of times if I use the term protege, people will say to me, it feels like what you're saying, because the word protege comes from the root to project, the French word to project.
Oh,
Yeah. So, and it's very close to prodigy, right? And a
right,
prodigy is somebody in your image, right? Who
right.
you're protecting, right? And to me, that's the wrong image in a mentoring relationship. As your mentee,
Absolutely.
your job is not to protect me. Your job is to push me. Your job is to help me stretch, to help me grow, to help me learn in my own path, not in your path. I remember pitching my services to a client at one point and saying, because protege is often used in the sponsorship context as well, and saying this term, they said, do you have to use the term protege? It sounds too much like you're projecting, that you do something in the image of the sponsor or in the image of the mentor, and that stuck with me for a really long time, and still to this day, that it's different than a protection relationship. It's different than an in my image relationship. You have to disconnect self and other, as that quote says. And you need to know that I'm having my journey, and help me on my journey. Don't help me on yours.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were fortunate to grow up with a mother, though, who knew mentoring and understood mentoring.
She knew it implicitly. It's interesting. I did grow up with a mother who knew mentoring. Actually, very Uh, funny enough, her maiden name is Menter, mentor, also with different spelling. But she didn't go back to work. She didn't become an expert in mentoring until I was in high school. And she didn't
Ah,
start the business until after I had graduated from high school. She was amazing in that she went back to school as a full-blown grown up with children at home and all the things. She got her doctorate when I was in middle school, and then started to do the foundations of her business when I was in high school. But it didn't start, the mentoring expertise really began after I left home. So I didn't fully appreciate the work that she did until I actually made that call and say, Mom, our women's group wants a mentoring
yeah,
program. That was when I really started to feel it. But she lived it. She really was a mentor to so many people.
yeah. I taught social work, graduate social work students, and half of my students were grown women with children, sometimes grown children. We've had mother-daughter combinations in the classroom. And so I can just see that. But what I would hypothesize, not having met your mother, is that she had a proclivity to being able to work effectively with people
No
and
question.
and to raise a daughter to be an independent thinker while at the same time not too far outside of the bounds of society that she gets kicked out and sent off to jail somewhere. So,
Yeah, it's so interesting, Gene. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'll tell you what that's bringing up for me. You and I are old enough to know the term latchkey kid, right? Which is
yes.
a term that my children don't know. But a latchkey kid, for those who are watching or listening who might be of a different generation, is a term that was used for us Gen Xers who were raised by parents who had jobs, and it's meant for like the latch key, the latch on the gate, right? That we would let ourselves in, to the house. And I was technically a latchkey kid, and I say that in not in a derogatory way. And when you talk about independence, I was a very independent kid because my parents both worked, and they believed that my brother and I were capable. And we let ourselves in after school, and we made ourselves snacks, and we did our homework. And I can remember sitting on the floor of her office while she was working, doing my homework. She really did breed this sense of independence, but also this sense of use your resources, ask questions, develop your relationships. They're really, really invaluable.
Well, This has been a great conversation. So what do you want the listener to be left with? What's the takeaway you want them to have?
First of all, that mentoring is an incredible vehicle for mentors and mentees alike to really move the needle on creating a more inclusive and equitable workforce and society. So that's thing one. And thing two is not just to seek out those relationships, but to create a sense of urgency in yourself for bridging differences as a tool for making a difference in creating a better workplaces, creating better work environments. And there's lots of ways to do that. I don't think we even touched the tip of the iceberg,
Oh,
Jean, but yeah, go ahead.
why the urgency?
You know, I think there's so many benefits to you can think about it in so many different ways, right? You can think about it from an individual perspective. Like my life has been so enriched by the relationships that I have created with people across visible elements of difference and invisible elements of difference, right? So just in terms of enriching your own life, it's urgent. But also, if you think about, we are an incredibly divided society right now. We are not seeing one another. I mean, we're seeing them, but we're not seeing them, right? And we're not seeing people for who they are, right? And so if we want to, if you care about this divided society, if you care about creating a world that is infused with kindness and accountability for your fellow human beings and making some dent in the universe across this polarity, there's nothing more urgent to me than having these conversations.
Right. So it's you do it for yourself, but you also do it for society.
Do it for society, do it for your kids, do it for your future kids, do it for somebody else's kids. But it makes a difference for the future, I think.
Okay. So if someone wants to be in touch with you, where should they go? How should they reach you?
Yeah, well, I'm on all social media platforms, Lisa Fain. Our website for Center for Mentoring Excellence is www.centerformentoring.com. Center spelled the American way, so CENTER for mentoring.com. And please connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I'll look forward to connecting with you there.
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been a delightful conversation. And you talked about learning. I learned something from you. I learned to go around the back door to the front and not from the front door, just from the front door to the back.
Oh,
So
thank you. It's
thank
been
you for that.
delightful for me too. Been delightful for me too, Jean. Thank you.
Well, that was interesting. I still have a feeling of being led to the theater from the back door to the front door rather than straight to the front door. I think that's because I never heard anyone talk about mentoring as a tool to promote inclusion. Usually it's the other way around. If you want to have a mentoring program, you first have to have good mentors who know how to include. If people want to learn how to be a good mentor, they by definition have to learn how to include and be motivated to do so and feel accountable for doing so. In this way, being a good mentor will serve as a tool to motivate the learning on how to include. I had never thought about it that way. Her personal story of how she got interested in mentoring and differences was also interesting. When she heard her mother speak at her organization about mentoring, she suddenly realized that this was a similar conversation to what happens when you're talking about differences. Before, she had thought about mentoring as belonging in one bucket and diversity and inclusion belonging in a different bucket. But after hearing her mother speak, she suddenly realized that they were both parts of the same phenomena, having an authentic connection with another person. And that's when she connected the dots and saw that the motivation and accountability for being a mentor could also be used to drive inclusion. This in turn connects with our work in leading consciously and our forthcoming book, Unconscious Change. The motivation that leads you to want to learn the tools of conscious change are the same motivations that will lead you to want to be an effective mentor. This in turn connects with our work in Leading Consciously and our forthcoming book on conscious change. The same motivation that will drive you to want to be a good mentor can also motivate you to want to learn the skills of conscious change so you can be that good mentor. I hope you will pre-order our book, Conscious Change. You can pre-order it at your favorite independent bookstore or online at your favorite retailer or at our website at leadingconsciously.com. If you go to our website, look for books, and you will find the links to the online realtors there. We hope you will pre-order because, as you know, pre-orders drive sales, and we want to get the word out to as many people as possible. Thanks for listening.